Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our webinar today, Spiritual Care at the Time of Death and Grief in the COVID-19 Pandemic. I'm Michael Skaggs, the Executive Director of the Chaplaincy Innovation Lab, and we're very happy to co-sponsor this webinar with Transforming Chaplaincy on a topic that is unfortunately timely, but we're very happy to be here to talk about it today. I do want to announce before we get started that the Chaplaincy Innovation Lab launched an ebook today on grief and supporting those who are grieving. So if you go to chaplaincyinnovation.org, it's right there on the homepage. You can't miss it. And we have some other ebooks there as well, but please do check it out. It's a free resource, and I hope that you find it useful. I'm going to disappear for now until the very end, and I will turn it over to Marilyn Barnes.
Thank you, Michael. Greetings, everyone. I am Reverend Marilyn Barnes, and I have the pleasure of serving as the moderator for this webinar on a very relevant topic, spiritual care at the time of death and grief in the COVID-19 pandemic. I serve as Vice President of Mission and Spiritual Care in the AdvocateAurora healthcare system in the Chicagoland area. I'm a Transforming Chaplaincy Fellow graduate, a board-certified chaplain, and a chaplain researcher. We have 4 esteemed panelists who will be sharing their experiences and knowledge with us during this webinar. The Reverend David Fleenor is a board-certified chaplain, ACPE certified educator, and Episcopal priest. David is an assistant professor in the Department of Medical Education and the Director of Education at the Center for Spirituality and Health at the Icahn School of Medicine at Mount Sinai in New York City. He is a student in Rush University PhD in Health Sciences program and a member of the ACPE Research Committee. David has a lot going on and is a wonderful person. David will be presenting on the topic, Caring for Families, Facilitating Virtual Goodbyes. Sean O'Mahony, and I practiced several times, I apologize, is the manager of clinical pastoral education at Ascension St. Vincent in Indianapolis, Indiana. He is a board certified chaplain with the National Association of Catholic Chaplains and serves as chair of the NACC Certification Commission. He is also an ACPE advisory committee member. Sean will be presenting on the topic, Caring for Families, Bereavement Support Calls. The Reverend Katie Pakos Reimer is the Director of Spiritual Care and Education at Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center in Boston, Massachusetts. Katie is an Episcopal clergy person with a doctorate in human development and psychology. She is a member of the Incident Command for Employee Wellness during COVID-19. Katie will present on the topic support for staff who are present at the time of death. Joanna is assistant professor at the University of Humanistic Studies in the Netherlands. She teaches in psychology and chaplaincy with a focus on rituals. She is the coordinator of the one-year celebrant educational program at the University of Humanistic Studies and conducts research on new rituals in a changing society with a focus on grief. Joanna will present on the topic, Addressing the Grief in Our Communities, Organizing Public Memorial Rituals. Welcome to all of our panelists. Our format for today's session will be each panelist sharing their knowledge and experience and expertise. After all the panelists have finished their presentations, we will have approximately 15 minutes for questions. Michael will provide us with the Q&A process at that time. David, I invite you to start us off with your presentation.
Okay, thank you, Marilyn. It's really great to be with you all today. As one of my co-panelists said before we got started, none of us are really experts on what to do in this current time because it's such a novel and new time. And so I think many of us are kind of muddling our way through to figure out, but that's one of the expertise, it's one of the marks of expertise for chaplains, I think, is that we're really good at improvisation and finding our way on our feet in uncertain times. 16 years ago, I wrote a master's thesis for my STM called Virtual Christian Church. Can you have true and meaningful church online? And in it, I posed an unlikely scenario that in the case of a pandemic where everybody was quarantined, could we have church online? And what would that look like? I'm from the Episcopal tradition of Christianity, so I played with what would the sacraments look like, baptism, Eucharist, and all that sort of thing. Never in my wildest dreams did I think that we would actually encounter a time such as this. But I bring that up because it's an area that I've been interested in for a long time. And now I'm having the opportunity, just like my fellow panelists and many of you who are attending today, to wade into these waters of how to provide virtual spiritual care, how to provide virtual ministry. And I want to tell you a story about one way that a CPE resident and I did this recently. So I'm in New York City. We are, as you know, one of the hardest hit areas in the world with this pandemic. And it all started to unfold within the last 4 to 6 weeks. So in early April, earlier this month, while one of my residents was on call, he got a call from a patient's son who requested last rites for his mother. And that happened on a Friday. But the last rites never occurred. I'm not exactly sure why. It was a very confusing time, and I think we were at the point where we didn't know how safe it was to go into rooms. We didn't know if there was adequate PPE. Our priests had varying directives, and, so there was a lot of confusion, understandably, and that's no negative about the hospital or any of my colleague priests. But as you may recall, there was so much uncertainty, we didn't really know what to do. So at any rate, the patient did die, and by the time the call came to the chaplain resident, the patient was in the morgue. The patient's body was in the morgue. The resident offered to say a prayer over the phone, but the son of the patient asked that if it could be done at the morgue by a Catholic priest. So we did a little follow-up, and we agreed that we would follow up with the son the next morning. And so that's when I got involved. I saw this as an opportunity as a certified educator of CPE. I saw this as an opportunity to go with my resident and to observe and make some evaluation of the kind of ministry that he was doing, and also to teach a bit. I think more than any of that, I mean, that's kind of the technical aspects. More of it was my heart was really moved for this son, and I wanted to see what kind of ministry we could provide, perhaps some comfort. So the resident had a follow-up phone call with the son, and what he asked was, he said, I don't need a Catholic priest. Could you just go down to the morgue? Could you put a rosary on her body? And could you say some prayers with me on the phone? And this is where the virtual nature of the ministry came in. At that time, the visitation restrictions had already been enacted, and so he couldn't come to the hospital, and he couldn't be there to bear witness to his mother in the morgue. And so the resident and I went down, and we brought a rosary, and we spoke to the morgue attendant, and the morgue attendant brought her body out. But while he went to go get her, one of the physicians who was about to conduct an autopsy on somebody else walked by. And the resident and I were uncertain about what kind of precautions should we take. So we asked him, which is sort of convenient, right? Here's a guy who's about to do an autopsy. And so he was somewhat uncertain as well, but said, if I were you, I would keep her covered and, even keep your distance to some degree, because we don't know what happens to the viral load after death. So we did that. Under normal circumstances, we would want to at least expose the head just to recognize the dignity of this human being. And that was really the point of the ministry in so many ways, was to honor the dignity of this human life, of this mother. And what I came to realize later, just a little bit later, was that our role, which is not so different from our role under normal circumstances, was to personalize her. Because when there are so many deaths in a day, in a week, in a month, it's really easy to depersonalize, which is a way of dehumanizing. And I think one of our roles as spiritual care providers is to humanize, is to personalize by getting into those details. So at any rate, we had the son on speakerphone on one of our iPhones. We had his mother's body there that was covered. We put the rosary on her body as he had requested. And then we had a prayer book. And we went through a series of prayers and some rituals. And at the end of it, what was really interesting was that this was a strange way to do ministry, because I hadn't really done it this way before with someone on speakerphone. But in many ways, it was really a familiar way, because the son was grieving in the ways that any of us would under those circumstances, in the ways that we've seen and witnessed so many people do under these circumstances when we're in our roles as chaplain. And what was really touching was what he was saying to her through the phone as we were holding it, which is really awkward. And that's another one of the things I love about chaplaincy. It's just really awkward sometimes. And that's what's interesting about this role. So we're not sure how close to hold the phone to her, but we know enough to know to facilitate this man's lament and this grief. And what he said was, "Mom, I love you." He's crying. "I miss you. I'm sorry I can't be there. Please forgive me." And he's saying all these very important things that we would facilitate if it were an in-person encounter. So we finished that. We said a few things to him and tried to facilitate that grieving process a bit more in awkward fashion. And then we ended the call, and then we went back to the office and went about our day. And some of the things that we learned that I learned in that experience was how challenging and difficult it is to do this ministry in a disembodied sort of way. And it really highlighted for me how important the physicality of ministry is. We often pay attention and observe a person's body language to take cues when we're in person of, should I continue this pause, or is this a good time for me to interject, or should I put my hand on this person's shoulder? Perhaps I should kneel down next to this person. All of these are cued by observation of the body language, and we didn't have that. And so we had those awkward moments of, is he about to say something, or is he waiting for me to say something? And I think if I had any word to offer about all of that, is what we have in our toolkit is the ability to embrace that awkwardness. And again, I'll underscore that that's one of the things I love about this ministry, and that I love about CPE and chaplaincy, that we train for this. We train for these awkward moments. And I think that this is an opportunity for us to lean into that awkwardness and embrace it. One practical thing that I've started to do with my supervisees is that I now supervise them over the telephone, because they're doing a lot of telechaplaincy visits, and I'm of the belief that the supervision can be enhanced by matching the modality that they are providing ministry in. So when they're providing face-to-face ministry, we meet in person, face-to-face, in my office for supervision. And now, because of a variety of reasons, precautions being one of them, we have supervision over the phone, because I'm hoping to facilitate more reflection on that kind of ministry, the awkwardness of, I can't see your body, I don't know what your body language is saying, let's see if we can fill out this moment together and build some facility with that. But in the end, I think we felt pretty proud of the ministry that we were able to provide to this grieving man. And I want to commend my resident, who did an excellent job. And it was really a privilege. This is another one of those strange things about chaplaincy. It was such a privilege to be in that cold, barren morgue on that day with this family. And if you're a spiritual care provider, I know you know what I mean. Well, Marilyn, I'll turn it back to you now.
Thank you, David. And thank you for reminding us about it's okay to be in that awkwardness. Sean, I'll hand it over to you.
Great, thanks, Marilyn. It's an honor to be part of this call. And, I wanted to begin with a confession as well, especially here I am as a Catholic minister. It seemed about right to start there. So my confession is that I'm not an expert on the topic I'm presenting. And in fact, I imagine, especially if there are hospice chaplains on this call, there may be people in the community here who have a lot more experience than I do around providing bereavement support. So what I am here to do is talk about a pilot project, something we're trying out, maybe to spark a little bit of creativity. And I'm also here as a learner myself to try to see what can I gather from the insight of this community knowing I've already benefited from some of the other webinars through Transforming Chaplaincy and the Innovation Lab. I wanted to give back a little bit to that. So I'm reminded today, though, of my chaplaincy career beginning in hospice. So when I was first inspired to be a chaplain, it was serving as a hospice volunteer. And it really was that experience of seeing how chaplains collaborated together from different faith backgrounds, all seeking the best way to honor the person, the faith, the culture, the values of their patients. That was part of my call to chaplaincy. And so I feel brought back to that a little bit now in thinking about, in a hospital setting, what kind of support can we potentially offer to our family members who are, in many cases, have not been able to come to visit due to visitor restrictions, who may be more isolated, may not have been able to have the rituals that they've been used to being able to draw upon to make meaning in their bereavement. And so through that process, we've come up with this initiative that I want to share with you a little bit about. So I serve in Indianapolis at the largest hospital in our St. Vincent network, part of Ascension. And we generally have a census of about 550, although that is smaller right now without doing elective surgeries and other procedures. And I am part of a health network that has hospitals in smaller towns and mid-sized cities here in Indiana. So prior to the COVID crisis, we had spiritual care volunteers who were sending condolence cards to bereaved family members. So when a patient would die in one of our facilities, a card would be sent to them. And in some places, there were yearly memorial services where these family members could return to the hospital and receive some spiritual support. However, obviously in the current environment, both of those were not possible. We didn't have any volunteers coming in. There was not going to be an opportunity for memorial service. And we recognized as a team this gap. And our mission calls us to spiritually centered, holistic care that provides special attention to the poor and vulnerable. So we were challenged by that mission as well to provide some level of spiritually centered care at this time. Additionally, as a clinical pastoral educator, I am supervising a group of chaplain interns and also working with our chaplain residents. And as David mentioned, much of their care is being moved to a telephone where they are trying to, with as much heart as they can, make a connection with a patient who is not able to have many visitors, and also to their family members. And the early reports I was getting about that actually were more promising than I had expected. I had made an assumption that it would be very difficult to make a connection via phone. And while I think there are some losses and challenges, some of the stories that my students were telling me were about how meaningful and actually heartfelt those times could be, and how much gratitude there was for the attempt. So those factors, the recognizing the changing environment, the loss of some ritual that may have been out there already, some of the positive experiences we had by trying to reach out by phone to our patients, inspired this pilot project, where we are seeking to reach out about 4 to 6 weeks after the death of a patient, just to acknowledge and provide some measure of simple support to bereaved family members. And we brought together a team of chaplains to pilot this, which included some of our ACPE students and a few of our staff chaplains. And we built this team and utilized a report that had been generated by our IT services, drawn from the electronic medical record, that just had very simple information: the patient's name and their date of death, and who their next of kin or emergency contact was. So we have very basic information honoring not having any other protected information about the person or what was going on with their medical illness, to also very simply and hopefully from the heart extend care. So the care that we are offering really through these bereavement phone calls has 3 simple goals. So the first is to just extend condolences and acknowledge the reality of the loss. And there I'm informed by William Warden, who talks about the 4 tasks of mourning. And the first one of those is to acknowledge the reality of the loss. And his research and writing says that just that simple reality, this is something we know as chaplains, just acknowledging loss, can bring some measure of healing and support someone in their bereavement process. And I know I've felt that even in this time, with all the small losses that have added up with COVID, just to take time to acknowledge that I miss baseball in this season. That's the most superficial one, that I miss ritual, I miss family, all the simple losses somehow does help one to cope with it. So that's the first goal, just to extend condolences and acknowledge the reality of the loss. We are trying to do a brief assessment about coping, so trying to understand what's helping someone at this time, what might the challenges be for them at this time. And then the third is to offer some ongoing bereavement resources. So we imagine making 1 or maybe 2 calls with a family member, and at that point would be referring them. And so we were able to compile a list of resources, some by phone, some via video conferencing in the various counties in Indiana, and also partnering with our local hospice agencies to put those together. We also have some resources for counseling available at our hospital sites if someone needs that. So very simple care to try to reach out, acknowledge the reality of the loss, a little bit about how they're coping, and then offer these ongoing bereavement resources. And this is just our 3rd week of doing these regularly. This is a brand new project. We kind of got it going in March and then began making these calls here in April. And, you know, I don't have a lot of results to share with you, but I think the key theme that has stood out to me is gratitude. The calls that I've made, that my students have made, family members are just grateful that someone has reached out, even if in many cases they're not interested in a lengthy conversation. Many of the conversations I've had are, you know, 2, 3, 5 minutes, but folks sharing a brief snippet of how they're doing and just thank you so much for calling. I've been inspired by some of the creative things I've heard families doing to connect virtually with one another, and some of the pastoral care that's being provided by congregational leaders. I also have been moved by the couple of times we've really had requests for resources. Somebody looking for a grief share group, for instance, they've been particularly poignant. People who, again, have been kind of searching, not knowing where to turn, and I think particularly grateful at that moment to have that kindness of a resource offered to them. So this is something we're going to continue to explore. We're in a phase of assessing as well. Is this the best role for a chaplain? Is there another professional that might be best served to make these? But I am glad to share briefly of our experience and really would look forward to learning from others about what they are doing to provide support at this time. But a key message I would have is to listen for what is possible on the phone. I think more is possible there than I had expected. And then also remembering the importance of acknowledging the loss. Even if we are not able to provide a lot of care, there's not much more to it. Just giving people a chance to name and acknowledge their loss makes a difference. So I will pass it back to you, Marilyn. Thank you.
Thank you, Sean. I appreciate that saying, listen for what is possible. All right, Katie, over to you.
Thank you. Next slide, please. So thanks to everybody for being here. And like my colleagues, I'm not an expert. I'm swimming in this raging river with all of you, and happy to share some of the ways here in Boston at Beth Israel Deaconess we're supporting our staff. I start with this slide because I have had the experience of doing, you know, what I think is good patient care. We're involved in escorting family members up to visit and final visits of loved ones. We're allowing single visits at the end of life, and chaplains escort the family up. If the patient is COVID positive, which so many are now, we pray outside the room and then hand them over to the patient's nurse, who then teaches the family how to don the protective gear, and in they go to the patient room. And these pictures here through the window are represent what my experience has been, which is I say goodbye to the family as they go into the room, and it's the nurse actually who's in there hot and sweating beneath all the PPE, facilitating the goodbye with the family member and the patient. And I say that because I think that's the front line, which is not at all to diminish what I and we are doing, but it's the staff who really are in there with the patients, who are doing much more spiritual care and emotional care than they typically have to. And so when I was asked to think about this, I wanted to start with just that truth, that that they are having an experience that I'm not having, and how can I honor that, be helpful if I can be helpful, and acknowledge the difference between our roles. So next slide, please. At Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center, early on in this pandemic, we coined the term emotional PPE. So we started thinking about what can we do for staff, what does emotional PPE look like, knowing that we're limited in terms of the amount of people, of chaplains who are on site, our roles are different, but what can we actually do? And I described it at the beginning as like throwing spaghetti at the wall to see what would stick. Like we got tons of stuff online on our portal, our hospital portal page, poetry, meditations, music. You know, that was one big push that very first week. We set up, I'm going through this poster here, something that we called a warm line. It's not a hotline because that would be too alarmist. A warm line available for any staff to call 24/7. They leave a message and get a call back from a chaplain or a social worker. I should say that the director of social work and I are in incident command. And initially we were there as patient family experience leaders, and that, like in the third week, became employee wellness leaders, that's where they needed our energy to be. So we're doing a lot of these initiatives are between social work and chaplaincy. We established what we called a wellness reset Zoom meeting Monday through Friday. So anyone in the medical center can dial in. It's I actually have never even dialed in. But it is a brief kind of wellness reset of deep breathing, mindfulness exercises that, you know, we're finding groups or units on, you know, groups of nurses on different units are calling in and doing it together. Even I tell them, even if they do 5 minutes of it, it's a discipline that they're doing as a group, and that's a positive thing. One thing that has taken off, and I'll talk about this in a minute, is this daily email. We just kind of very quickly decided, actually it was when I was working on this poster, I was like, you know what else we should do? We should send a daily email. Let's call it Daily Hope. And we will curate some things and send it out to people's inboxes and give them a chance, let people know it's there, they can subscribe. That really took off, and I'll describe that in a minute. We had our Reiki coordinator offering to do Reiki over the phone, or Reiki, something similar to Reiki over the phone. In this poster, you can see too, we're pointing people to our employee assistance program. And then we also set up an Instagram account, BIDMC Spirit, which we thought would hit the demographic of, you know, residents and nurses, younger folks who are on social media a lot. So we had these published and printed, and we you know, kind of did a blitz and put them in all the break rooms and on all the units to let people know what we were offering. That was within the first couple of weeks. Next, please. Beyond that, we, you know, initially, as David was talking about that period where we just didn't understand enough about the transmission of this virus, and is it safe to be on site? Is it not safe? Who is it safe for? We were slow to get PPE. I mean, there were some crazy days there when it just felt unsafe. So we built up a lot of phone support, virtual things, virtual resources. Over time, though, we kept hearing, we want you to be here with us. We need you to be here with us. And so that became clear that we needed to dedicate at least a small group who were on site, primarily doing staff support, also with patient support. And what that has looked like are a few things. I have never been asked for prayer more than during this pandemic. People stop me in the hallway and ask for prayer. I'll say I don't usually wear a clerical collar, but I told everybody on my staff who has any sort of indicator of being clergy to please wear that, because we need to be visible and easily accessible. So requests for prayer started coming. Blessing of hands, you know, people just saying, could you do that thing you do sometimes? Could you like bless our hands? You know, a lot more prayer than typically people ask for. You know, the very informal checking in with staff, how are you doing? Which to me at times felt pretty superficial and light, like I didn't feel like it was that valuable. And yet we kept hearing, no, it is, it's really helpful. Just please keep coming. We want to see you. So that continues. And then over time, we've set up and made this offering of huddling with teams and doing, you know, a more formal debrief. I've found that nurse leaders really like knowing that this is happening. If the leadership is involved, people come. And I put here the arc of a huddle because, you know, we think about giving people a chance to share their experience, and you know, and we also don't want to leave them undone at the end of this little debrief, right? The other thing I've found is that it's hard to do any deep reflection when the immediate work demands are so great. So finding that sweet spot between inviting reflection and keeping people kind of put together enough to go on and do their job. Something I like to do a lot is kind of psycho-ed about stress response, the disaster curve some of you have seen, helping people look at a model and say, oh, that might be what's happening to me now, or this is how I understand my inner experience. It also kind of engages the frontal lobes. And when people are so emotional, it's helpful to have just some content that helps them understand, so kind of move into their cognitive sense. We set up just a couple weeks ago a group of us in senior social work positions, myself, and organizational consultants. Each of us has a team of 8 nurse leaders, and so we're available to meet one-on-one with those nurse leaders. You know, it's both kind of coaching and wellness support for them. I feel like these have been really important and good relationships that have been happening over these couple of weeks. And I feel like, you know, sitting down with each of these nurses, it's like, tell me your version of this unique hell that we're living in, sadly. That's what it's begun to feel like, because they're just caring so very much. Marilyn, are you giving me a signal? Okay, keep going. We have distributed scripts for pauses, for how to do a pause if somebody dies and a chaplain is not present. We've distributed prayers from different traditions to make them possible for staff to use them if we can't be on site. I'm just gonna, in the next couple slides, I'll move through very quickly, just show you what this Daily Hope email is about. So we have over 500 people have asked to receive this Daily Hope email from all parts of the medical center and in our network. We always include some sort of beautiful visual at the beginning. This particular one was on Earth Day, and you can say, today we invite you to enjoy The Peace of Wild Things by Wendell Berry, then explore the work of environmental artist Andy Goldsworthy, and listen to this music, and then for a dose of joy, watch tiny goats visit river otters at the Oregon Zoo. So Michael, if you'll just move through these other slides, you can see, here's The Peace of Wild Things. Here's beautiful music playing. If we had time, I'd click on that link and show you this musician playing music in a glacier field. People are really responding well to this opportunity to kind of go to a place of beauty, a place that's far, far from a busy academic medical center in the middle of a pandemic. Thank you.
Thank you, Katie. I appreciate your swimming in the raging river, and you have provided us with some life jackets with some of the resources. So thank you. Joanna, we'll hand it over to you.
Yes, thank you so much. We've already heard so many beautiful examples of how to provide spiritual care in this unbelievable and difficult time. And I wanted to move now a little bit more further by discussing what could be the role of collective rituals in providing kind of community spiritual care. Next slide, please. Because when we see what happens around disasters or tragic life events, collective trauma, all these kinds of grief experiences, we often see rituals emerge in different ways. And also the question that I wanted to ask is, could it be possible for chaplains to also organize more collective, more public rituals after the pandemic? Would this be a possibility? And why are public rituals important? Well, they give society three things. They create a sense of community, they create social order after a time of chaos where we are in right now. We are living in an absolute disruption of our everyday lives. And a third thing that rituals give us is they can transform all of these experiences and give some sense of hope, give some reconciliation. We already heard some beautiful examples how that could work. And on the next slide, you can see around tragic collective traumatic events, we see already all kinds of public rituals emerge. We see, for instance, silent or the opposite, loud protests. We also see this during this COVID pandemic, for instance, the clapping for the healthcare workers or making noise for the healthcare workers. But if we go on in the future, we might also think about collective grief rituals. And by that, I mean rituals specifically for the bereaved. You could organize these things within an institution or within a local community or something, or maybe even bigger than that. Then we also have national or local remembrance rituals, which are more general for the public. So not specifically for bereaved, but more for the public. For instance, in China, we saw this 3 minutes of silence at the beginning of April, so more as a national day of mourning or something. Well, the question is, could we organize this, maybe these kinds of initiatives as chaplains as well? And in a later phase of dealing with collective grief, collective trauma, we also see the emerge of monuments. And I don't know if this is something that will happen after this pandemic. Will it happen locally, nationally, or maybe even across the world? And on the next slide, I wanted just to share some thoughts about, well, how could we organize such a collective or public ritual, a public memorial after this pandemic? And I've been teaching ritual design for some years now, and I've learned so much, and I'm still learning, of course, but one of the things that always comes back is that you really need to know your community. And of course, as a chaplain, you know your community well, but especially if you organize a public ritual where you have different communities together, it can be sometimes challenging to choose the right words, to choose the right symbols, to choose the right ritual actions. So if you're dealing with a pluralistic memorial or a pluralistic ritual, you have to be really careful what language to use, what symbols are now very speak to more than one person. The second question you should ask yourself is, for whom is this ritual? Is this ritual for the bereaved? Are we remembering people who have died during this pandemic? Or is this ritual for the whole society, for everyone who is dealing with these difficult times? And if you have figured out this question, the question comes in, well, who should actively speak or participate during this ritual? And there is also a lot of debate possible. Who should be the voice of this pandemic now? and whose voices are left out, because ritual always includes but also excludes, and it's not easy to make a ritual for everyone, but you can think about that, who is included, who is excluded. And the last thing that I wanted to share is, well, at the center of ritual is action, doing something together. What can we do? Because we cannot change reality, the world that is happening, the tragedies that are happening already, but through ritual action, people feel that they are able to do something. They can go someplace and participate. So what I see sometimes happening in the Netherlands, that in new rituals, we over-verbalize rituals. We talk a lot, but we forget that we can also do something maybe in silence, or do some ritual action at the center of the ritual. Try not only to talk about it, but what can we do? So in conclusion, on the next slide, I just wanted to say that I think public mourning and ritual is one type of public mourning. And for me, ritual is a type of kind of community spiritual care. It is important for collective healing, because ritual cannot change the reality, but it gives an opportunity to channelize emotion, also towards the painful experience, to focus on what people have been dealing with, what we've been going through. But it also gives room for hope. So it gives both sides, the painful and the sadness, but also the thankfulness and the positive kind of outlook on life. And while ritual is absolutely not therapy, but it can have therapeutic effects. And we know that from research, because people kind of feel the emotions, they can express their emotions in different ways, through ritual actions, through symbols, through sharing things within communities. So it can feel, although people are still sad, but it can feel as a relief to participate in a ritual. And finally, ritual gives us this other perspective on reality through the use of symbols, through the use of all kinds of well, different views. So my final slide would be by one of my, the next slide would be a quote by one of my favorite teachers, Ronald Grimes, who wrote, "Cured, you are fixed, healed, you are reconnected." And I think ritual as well as spiritual care are not about fixing people, but about healing, about reconnecting. And especially in this time of isolation and well, these very strange and disruptive time that we are living in, and that people are really dealing with many deaths at the moment, we can ask ourselves, what can we do to reconnect, and in what way? Thank you so much.
Thank you, Joanna. Appreciate that around ritual. It is very important, and we will see more and more how it will evolve based upon this pandemic. So thank each of our panelists. You have provided us with some, I'll call them golden nuggets that we can draw upon, and I've taken copious notes that I will bring back to my colleagues about opportunities for us to provide care and ministry. Michael, I'll hand it over to you about the question and answer process.
Sure, and it's a very simple process. You should see on the right-hand side of your screen a little bar that says questions. Actually, I'm not sure what it looks like for the person in the audience. I only know what it looks like on my side, but if you look over there on the right somewhere, it should say questions where you can ask, and I will field them here for our panelists. And some of them are very broad and some are not so broad, but please do ask away. One, I think this is for all the panelists. Are there grief books that you can recommend that would be most helpful for isolated grief and sudden death?
I
broaden it to the best books that you know of on grief.
So I don't have I don't have a major, strong academic answer for this, but there is a picture book called Tear Soup that more people have responded positively to than any other narrative type book. I would say that speaks more to the isolated grief. And I don't know the author, but it's called Tear Soup.
Thank you, Katie. Also, a question came up of, can Katie share her PPE slide? It is a great slide.
So what will happen is we'll send a recording of this over the next couple of days, and that will be included with all of that and anything else that that you might be interested in. This is a sort of a technical question that, of course, anyone who has experience, please answer. Have you been able to use video conference calls with any of the families? And if so, how did that go? We did a very early webinar on telechaplaincy, but this is a huge thing. So have any of you used specifically video conference technology, and what have you learned from
that? We had a huge iPad donation project. That was one of the things we did early on, to have at least 2 iPads on every unit. And we had long conversations with IT about, making them compatible for protected health data and so forth. We finally convinced IT to make these iPads, which are available for family use and family visits, so not for conveying medical information, just for families to use to connect with their loved ones, to have the minimal amount of restrictions on them so that they can use FaceTime and Google Hangout, Google Chat, and all, so regardless of what kind of technology the family has, everything can work with this particular iPad. I'm not a technical person, you can tell, but that has been hugely successful, and they're being used all the time now. So we use whatever the family has on their device and connect with patients.
I'll just share also within AdvocateAurora Health, we're also using iPads and another type of device, calling it virtual visits. So can virtually visit with your loved one and using, as you said, either Zoom or some other type of program that is secured. So they get a password so that no one can come into their conversation. Michael, I'll take the next question. Okay, question, nuts and bolts question. Where are the phone calls happening? I'm concerned about caller ID for my students showing up with families.
Star 67.
Yeah.
Right, that's a great question. So mostly the calls have been happening through the hospital. We actually have kind of quiet, people have offices or private space where they can make a call using the hospital phone. We also have some software that we are piloting that through our IT team, where a person using a headset and a computer can make a call that is private and secure and appears as from the hospital. And the third backup is, like Katie said, would be blocking caller ID. We've not done much of that, but that would be the other option, I guess, as a backup. But I think finding a way where the call can come from the hospital and then not, I think is the best way to convey the privacy and the care of the hospital and protect whoever the caller is from getting calls back.
Another.
We did the same thing.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to add, all of our chaplains and residents have iPhones, and so to stand up the telechaplaincy operation as quickly as possible, we just moved to having them use star 67, and our staffing mix has been partially from home and partially from inside the hospital. And one of the lessons that we learned was, we thought, well, we could call the nursing staff and get some information about the patients on the floors, but it turns out the nursing staff is really overwhelmed and busy, and that didn't work out well. So it did work out well to have a mix of in-person chaplaincy and telechaplaincy. So the in-person chaplains could go up to the units, again, physically embodied, see and hear and feel what's going on and get information that way, and then feed it to the telechaplains for them to prioritize who they call, that sort of thing.
This is sort of a nuts and bolts and a broader question. And Katie, you might have the most the closest experience with this, but of course anyone else, please. What do you do to educate the nurses or other staff to deal with religious requirements surrounding death, or any sort of, faith-specific process of any of this? They mentioned the sort of the Jewish requirements around bodily disposition, but has that come up so far, and how have you handled it?
It's a good question. So Boston is a heavily, well, my hospital it's about 9% Jewish patient population, about 60% Catholic population. And the nurses, I would say, are probably about 90% Catholic. So they're down on the sacrament of the sick part. And I would say that our archdiocese actually has done this creative thing where they've, anyway, there's a group of priests who will anoint COVID positive patients, and they're living separately and they're available to come in. And that has been working pretty well. We have, our Jewish chaplain in particular has very good relationships with all the ICU staff, and she's calling in regularly and in touch with them. I think she's laid really good groundwork over the years about this topic. So we haven't had mishaps or questions. I would also say that everybody is so, forgiving, and we're all doing the best we can. And so people do ask for help. I mentioned that I distributed prayers from different faith traditions that would be appropriate to read at the end of life. So that's kind of how it's been for us.
I can add that we have a postmortem policy that we had to suspend in conversation with, our hospital leadership, because, for example, sometimes Jewish patients will want a shomer or someone to sit with the body for a period of time, and we had to suspend that. Sometimes there's requests for direct removal, meaning the body is removed directly from the floor, bypasses the morgue. We had to suspend that practice because we couldn't have people, and we're really still under these suspensions. We really aren't comfortable permitting people to come into the hospital and go up into the floors. We're really trying to limit that, as I think most hospitals in this area are. So I anticipate that down the road, that's going to be a cause of spiritual struggle and pain for folks. And we're in this terrible time where we have to make some really difficult choices of physical safety, over these types of things. So there's no real clever answer that I've found for working with that.
Joanna, I believe you addressed some of this in your presentation. The question is, one of the biggest challenges we are experiencing is not COVID deaths, but other deaths and the distancing of families as we consider recognizing these deaths in a single display monument type of memorial. Is it fair to include both to honor each?
Yes, that's a very good question. I think, this really depends on the focus of the ritual. For whom is this ritual? I think after this pandemic, we need to kind of honor and pay tribute to both, absolutely. But I'm still wondering whether this should be in the same ritual or maybe separately. I'm not sure yet. But indeed, for those families who cannot be there with their loved ones in the final moments, this is whether you are dying because of COVID or something else. This is really it's a horrible time for families. And also in the Netherlands, chaplains came up with some ideas how you can kind of link the last moments of the patient, perhaps later with a funeral or a kind of memorial that you organize after the pandemic, if it's possible to have a bigger gathering or something. So perhaps using a symbol in the dying moments, and also use that during the funeral or maybe a remembrance ritual later. So yes, that's all possible, but you have to think about it very very, very well, how to include, whom to include. Yes. Yeah.
I was just going to add, this is less ritual, but maybe addresses this a little bit, which is we, like Sean's program, we have a bereavement call program now, and we decided to include calling families of those who died not from COVID, but died during this period because they too face the horrible visitor restriction issues. So that's at least an upstream way maybe to mitigate or at least acknowledge that experience during this time.
Yes.
Thank you.
You know, I didn't mention, but just related to that around the bereavement care, I think it's mattered to our staff, and I'm thinking now about how else we can share it, but for them to know that some care is being made available, because I think the staff distress that I've heard and we've tried to minister to as well around not having family present or having less family present at time of death, I think has been very challenging for our caregivers. And so the couple of them that we've been able to help them to know what is being done to try to support the family at this time, as well as what resources they have. And I'm learning things right now too, we could add to that to take care of themselves. But I think there's potentially a benefit for the staff morale of whatever you do, and it may be things you ordinarily do already, to communicate it to them at this time, just so that they know they're not alone in trying to manage this loss with family not present.
Thank you. Hey, Michael, I know we're getting close to time. I found one question that I really would like each of the panelists to, in 20 seconds or less, respond to. Okay, the question is, could each panelist speak to how they are coping with their own fears and anxieties to stay centered and grounded while offering spiritual leadership, leadership, education, and care during this time? We'll start with you, David, and go in the order of how you present it.
Okay. Well, that's a good question. And the answer is not very easily. It's very hard. The thing that I'm really focusing on right now is in chaplaincy and supervision, you know, we contain a lot of feelings for people. And I'm aware of myself and others getting onto Zoom calls or getting into conversations and just flooding, right? Just opening up with all of the terrible stories and all the losses, like just kind of just rolling right out. And that's where we are. We're full. And so I'm very aware of taking time and noticing my limitations. If I can't contain and I'm overwhelmed, then I'm giving myself room and space to say, I'm not going to be able to help this person at this moment. I need to get them to somebody who can contain them for this moment.
Thank you. Sean?
Yeah, it's not easy. So acknowledging losses, I mentioned that does seem to help me. Nature, though, I think is the key. If I can spend 30 seconds, a couple of minutes paying real good attention to something happening in nature, it somehow connects me beyond myself and provides some relief. I like Simone Weil, a French author, who talks about like unmixed attention is prayer. So just being attentive is being prayerful, from my Catholic tradition. So little things of nature, I just noticed that so much for me, what a difference it makes. So that's probably the biggest thing I'm relying on, but it's not easy, and there's a lot of helplessness and uncertainty for sure.
Thank you. Katie?
Yeah, so when the pandemic first broke out, I started sleeping separately in my house just to keep everybody safe. And it became a bit of a monastic cell. Actually, I picked up my journal again, and it was very prayerful and very centering. It helped me at the beginning of this to feel somewhat equipped. You know, we're deep into it now, and it's exhausting. And there are times when I just feel really physically played. I'm trying to make myself do yoga. I don't like doing it on Zoom, but I'm making myself do it. I'm working remotely 2 days a week, and that has helped a lot, to be at home with my kids and in my, you know, comfy clothes. So that's what I'm doing.
Thank you. Joanna?
Yeah, just what everybody already said. Self-care is really important. Take care of yourself, stay healthy, stay fit, and spend time with the loved ones that you can spend time with. In my case, it's my children, and yeah, try to also sometimes leave the work in the office and have a moment for yourself, do something else, play some Lego, and I don't know, these kinds of things. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you all for sharing today and for the amazing care that you are offering during this time. Peace and blessings, and continue to be safe and to be well. Michael?
Well, thank you all. Thank you to our panelists for your time and your energy and your wisdom. You know, that last question was absolutely perfect because it reminds us all that we come to a webinar, we soak in this wisdom, but you all are in the middle of this like everyone else. You know, you're not outside of it. So we should be especially appreciative for that reason. And thank all of you for coming today. I know that you're all very busy, and so we're very happy to see you here. This will be posted on the Chaplaincy Innovation Lab website at chaplaincyinnovation.org, and we're very grateful to Transforming Chaplaincy for co-sponsoring this with us. We will post the slides. I think Katie's poster, we're going to put that up there as well. And then if there were other resources that you had questions about, please do let us know. info@chaplaincyinnovation.org. We'll make sure you get them. Thank you all. We look forward to seeing you again in the future, and be well. Bye-bye.